Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of our webinar. We're going to take the stage again, and now we're going to talk about the enabler adaptive management, monitoring, and maintenance. We have three speakers, and first we're going to talk about maybe a barrier that needs to be enabled, but also an opportunity. We're going to talk about natural dynamics and uncertainties and how to deal with them. And if you think about nature and applying natural processes, nature is a tricky thing and it's rather unpredictable sometimes. So it's good to think about the uncertainties in your project. So first, I would like to welcome Ellis Penning to the floor. Welcome, Ellis.
Hi.
Ellis is a expert researcher for Deltares and has been doing a lot of work there in the field of eco-hydrology, working with plants and aquatic systems, and also the lead in the Building with Nature program at Deltares. So Ellis, please tell us more about uncertainties.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to have you all here. I'm going to address the topic of uncertainty in building with nature projects with you. And of course, there's a reason for that. We all know that the future is uncertain. We cannot predict everything that's going to happen, like the COVID pandemic that is causing us to work from home nowadays so often, things that are totally unexpected. Ignoring uncertainties, it may lead you to choose for suboptimal choices and results. For example, a plan might not be as sustainable as it could be. You can lead to stranded assets or lock-ins. So when you're taking decisions, you have to anticipate that changes are going to happen in the future. And we're going to argue today that building with nature is a particularly well-suited means to addressing uncertainties in the future that you cannot foresee. So I want to explain you a bit about what uncertainties actually are and how you can use them in talking about building with nature projects. Now, we have to understand that there are different levels of uncertainty. You can be fairly certain, there might be a few alternatives, there might be a range of futures that you're working with, or the future might be completely unknown. This is also called deep uncertainty. But next to these levels, there's also types. You have ambiguity, when people have different belief systems. It might be unpredictable, we really don't know what an extreme event might look like. It might be incomplete knowledge, just because we just don't know these aspects of a solution yet. And then there's different sources of uncertainties. There are social uncertainties, depending on what people want, what financial aspects are there, legal. There are technical uncertainties and natural uncertainties. And these are the natural dynamics that were already mentioned a bit also by Simeon. Now, in all of these uncertainties, you find them both in your problem space and in your solution space. And with the problem space, I mean the world around us. What's going to happen with climate change? Is the sea level going to rise, and how much is it going to rise? What's happening to population growth, extreme weather events, and natural dynamics? So this is part of your problem space. And in the solution space, if you're going to choose for a building with nature solution, the natural dynamics come back into the discussion as well. And if you're talking about these very unknown futures, you might be puzzled to say, okay, now how can I choose? And this often also leads to indecisiveness. And it might also say that, well, it's so uncertain, I'm not really able to consider whether building with nature is the best option for me. But rather, we can also think about, well, we have to deal with this. We have to go along and we have to act. And we have to work in ways that solutions take uncertainties into account. The uncertainties that are in the problem space are not only for natural solutions, but they're also for the more traditional gray solutions. You would also find them. So if you're choosing for a building with nature solution, we see that these are more adaptive because they can grow with sea level rise. You can alter them, you can add a bit, you can change a bit. You can also move your target. So if your target is moving, your solution may move to your target and your goals as well. Now we see that the enablers all provide you with solutions to deal with uncertainties, whether it being better system understanding of multi-stakeholder processes to resolve the social uncertainties. And basically, if you look carefully for each of these enablers, you would see that there is different tools. So this is represented here by this tool bench, where you find for different types of levels of uncertainties, you find different types of solutions. Now, in one of these, you see this little circle. It's a bit towards the right-hand side of the toolbar. It is the adaptive management cycle. And that's the one that we're going to talk a lot about today. And that will be talked about in the next presentations as well. So get familiar with these is my message. Have a look at the website as well, and let them help you to start working with uncertainties. And then taking that in your toolbox, gather everything, take your map to an adaptive goal, and start enjoying working it. And that working with uncertainties, you do both during the planning, where you already assess what are the uncertainties in the problem space. You acknowledge that there are different uncertainties, the technical, the social, and the natural ones. And by addressing this in a conscious manner, it's easier to find solutions for them. Also ensuring proper finances and contracting, because they might be different than what you're used to in traditional solutions. And during the design, already start about discussing monitoring and maintenance, because that's part of the whole life cycle approach that you need to follow. Choose for flexibility or robustness, but also diversification. For example, in the title sheet, you saw 2 photos of a fortress in the Netherlands that has willows in front of it to protect it from wave impact. And they've been choosing different species of willows there to limit potential negative effects of diseases, for example. Evaluate alternatives with that uncertainty in mind. And during implementation, ensure proper monitoring. Now, this is something Irena is going to talk about as well. After implementation, ensure that proper monitoring is going to continue, evaluate, adjust, and adapt. So all in all, let's just start working. Good luck.
Thank you very much. I really like your presentation, and I think it's very inspiring. And I have one question for you. You talked a lot about uncertainties and how building with nature solutions fit in these uncertainties. So do you think that these solutions are a cause of extra uncertainties, or do you think they can help to minimize uncertainties?
Well, we see that there's different types of uncertainties, right? So they help to mitigate uncertainties that are difficult to handle with traditional solutions, because they are flexible and adaptive. So at the same time, the natural dynamics may make that people feel that there's more uncertainty, but we understand natural dynamics, and it is a challenge for us to explain this in the right way, that we understand the dynamics will change and you have to keep an eye on it. So it's basically changing your way of working. It is not assuming that the moment that you've implemented, it's done, but to say, okay, it's going to be something we will have to work on during its life stage as well. And that's just a shift of mindset.
Thank you very much for that answer. And your presentation leads us to the second part of this webinar. And in this second part of the webinar, we will discuss the enabler adaptive monitoring, management, and maintenance. And as Ellis already said, it is nature is very dynamic, and dealing with the dynamics of the nature is part of the solutions and the uncertainty that it causes. Also, this enabler focuses on balancing initial efforts and against the adaptivity and resilience. And furthermore, the organization and techniques for long-term dynamic and adaptive monitoring and maintenance. And to talk a bit more about uncertainties and about how you can apply management, monitoring, and maintenance, we have some speakers today with us. And I would like to ask you, Simeon, to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Belinda. Nice theoretical overview of how things should go, but I guess practice is always a little bit different. Luckily, our next speaker will talk about a very practical application of adaptive monitoring, maintenance, and management. She's a colleague of ours at RoyalHaskoning DHV, Petra Dankers, who is the senior engineer there, working mostly on cohesive sediments worldwide, but also very much in the Netherlands. So please, Petra, do we have a connection with you?
Yes, hello, Simeon.
That's great.
Yes.
Yes, we can all hear you.
Okay,
Petra
great.
calling in. So I'm gonna give the floor to you, if you can share your screen.
Yes, okay, thank you, Simeon. I will try to show my screen now. I think you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, or where you are, maybe good morning. Today, I would like to tell you something about more about adaptive monitoring and maintenance, but then in practice, when things do not go as expected, because, well, in practice, they actually never do. And this is also shown by this very unfortunate picture of an excavator which has sunken deep, deep into the mud of the Marconi salt marsh. Has actually nothing to do with adaptive monitoring and maintenance, but it is a good example of things that do not go as expected. And well, maybe also already a lesson for our future maintenance of the salt marsh. Okay, so now first let's proceed on things that Ellis already mentioned, uncertainties. In all our Ecoshape projects, we are working with natural processes, and this means we have to deal with uncertainties that come with this. Natural uncertainties such as unexpected or changing meteorological circumstances like fierce storms or something like that. And we're dealing here with a living system, so there are also uncertainties linked to plagues and diseases, as Ellis already mentioned. Furthermore, our working methods are often new. This means that we often use innovative techniques, and we have to deal with the uncertainties that come with this. And in the end, we have to keep in mind that we're not building a bridge here, where you design exactly what you want and you get exactly what you designed. We are creating a living system with all its challenging and wonderful unexpected effects. And this means that we need to be adaptive in what we do. And I would like to use the Marconi Salt Marsh project as an example. This was one of the Ecoshape projects. And first, very short, something about this project itself. And if you want to know more about it, you can find some information on the Ecoshape website as well. Well, the Marconi Delfzijl Salt Marsh project is a project located in the upper northeast of the Netherlands, along the Ems estuary. And it was a pilot project in which we investigated how we could build a salt marsh at a location where there was no salt marsh at all in the beginning. And we investigated also what the effect was of sowing glasswort seeds, so vegetation, and using different percentages of mud and how this would affect the morphological and ecological development of the marsh. And why would we want to build a salt marsh? Well, it delivers excellent ecosystem services. Or benefits such as flood risk management, biodiversity, water quality, health and well-being for the people that live in the area around there. So here are actually two pictures of the real salt marsh, and it looks exactly like the infographic, so that's nice. The left picture was taken 1 year after development, and the second picture on the right shows the wonderful autumn colors of the glasswort this autumn, 2 years after development. And we also see a very nice, naturally developed creek. So how did we implement adaptive monitoring in this project? Well, actually, for this project, it was relatively simple because it was a pilot project, an experiment, and then often it's easier to change and adapt things. For instance, we changed the monitoring equipment. Because you need to know, this project was created on the drawing table around 2011, and we actually started monitoring in 2018. And during these years, there had been massive innovations in monitoring techniques. Originally, we did not plan at all to use drones, as they were merely non-existent in 2011. And in the end, we did use them frequently with LiDAR and for making orthophotos, which helped a lot for gathering area covering information on bed and vegetation development. The same for changes in monitoring approach. During the project site, it developed and morphological changes occurred, and sometimes in an unexpected way. So we sometimes included some more and new monitoring locations and to follow the natural processes that develop, such as creek development, creek formation, and the formation of some sandbars. Now, in a pilot project and a research project, this is more or less a natural way of working. You check your project, you check your results, and you act and you change. But in general projects, even though they deal with nature or they are nature-based, there is often not a possibility to be very flexible in changing your approach or changing your budgets. But that's actually something that is very necessary in projects where you deal with nature, and it should become more possible in the projects you do and in the contracts you have. In the Marconi projects, adaptive maintenance was also a subject, and we tackled this at the beginning of the project to start with what-if questions. What if we have too much erosion? What if creek development goes out of hand? What if the brushwood groins do not work or are damaged? And we also had follow-up questions to that. What if the creek development goes out of hand? What do we define as out of hand, and what are then our options? And well, for this pilot, again, it was relatively simple as it was a pilot, and we wanted to see these unexpected things in order to learn, and we wanted as less maintenance as possible. For instance, in the pilot, we noticed from the monitoring results the development of a sandbar seaward of the brushwood groins. And you can also see that in the pictures at the right. And these sandbars were actually very unexpected. We did expect a lot of mud coming in, but we didn't expect the development of sandbars. But they had a very positive effect. They provided shelter to this area, and the maintenance of the brushwood groins at these specific locations actually was not needed anymore, or may not needed anymore, be needed anymore in the future. That was the case in this pilot project, but in general, projects are not pilots and they need to be a success, and you need to deliver what was promised. So for the maintenance part, it remains then necessary to be flexible, to see what happens and to adapt to a new situation. And in short, also two very different examples from practice where we can post also the message that adaptivity is important. For instance, the clay ripening project, also an Ecoshape project, where dredge material is brought on land and it's dried, and then it should be used for dike reinforcement. Well, we did not exactly get what was anticipated, and for dike reinforcements, you are obliged to use a specific kind of clay. But now what do? We are testing maybe if we can bend these rules a bit, try if we can use the clay with other specifications, and of course with the same safety levels. That is a top one priority. But we do innovate. We innovate because nature gave us something different than we anticipated. And the same can be said for many knowledge programs that exist. Often they plan knowledge development up to 5 years upfront. And I would say, don't do that. Make an adaptive program. Plan for the first year, then learn from your results, and then adapt. It's going to be a bit boring because I'm going to use the same words over and over again. And Ellis mentioned them also already. Be flexible and adapt. But it is actually the key message. And here you see, for most people maybe familiar, the plan, do, check, act cycle. People know it, but often they do not act on it. And when working with natural processes, this is the way to go. You have to make your plans and hypotheses. Then you do your work. Then you check. You learn from your mistakes. You learn from the unexpected turns. You learn from the natural developments. And then you act, you change, but you already have your scenarios ready, your what-if scenarios ready up front. So, to conclude, how to deal with uncertainties? Be adaptive. Well, you know, uncertainties, they are part of the game, so we better deal with it. And you need to be versatile, you need to be flexible, you need to be clever, but mainly, very often, it's just common sense. It's important to have your what-if questions ready and know what to do. What if this happens, and what then? What do we do? Plan, do, check, act over and over and over again. And this means that it's sometimes difficult if we have very rigid contracts. So this is something we really need to change, and we need to let nature take its course within the given limits, within the limits we give it. And I actually can conclude then with this, that if we work with natural processes, we can't always get what we wanted or anticipated. But if we try and we monitor and we change and adapt, we will find that we get exactly what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. Close the screen a little bit. Yes. Very nice presentation. How can a presentation be boring when you include the Rolling Stones, I wonder? And thank you for the wisdom, by the way. I do think you offer a great practical insight into handling uncertainties for nature-based solutions. So how does this differ from a conventional gray solution?
Yeah, I already touched a bit upon this in the presentation, and it really depends on the type of project. And but still, often, even though we are working in nature, in natural environment, and you have gray solutions, or maybe you want to go towards a more greener solution, you have to deal with the contracts, and you have to deliver what was promised or what was expected, and there's not much room for changes to that or for unexpected things. And there is something that we would like to change, because I think the nature-based solutions or the greener solutions, they offer so many interesting things, and there are maybe sometimes some more risks involved, but you can manage these risks if you monitor, and you have to monitor them very well. So that's something you really need to include in your projects.
Thank you very much for that answer. So we are going to conclude this presentation by Petra. I would like to mention to the audience that Petra and Ellis will also be at the discussion later. And you can please do ask questions. We had a lot of nice questions in the previous session, so feel free to send them towards us, and we will try to convey them to Petra, Ellis, and our next speaker. Belinda, can you introduce our next speaker?
Yes, of course I can. Our next speaker is Irena Doets. Irena is working at Boskalis Dredging and Maritime Company in the engineering department, and she has been involved in several dredging projects overseas mainly, and she was mainly responsible for the execution of the dredging works within the environmental boundaries and involved in the final permitting phase of the project. And we asked Irena today to talk a bit about her experience in Australia. So Irena, please take us to Australia and share your knowledge.
Thank you very much, Belinda. I'll take you to a place where it's maybe a bit warmer than here today. Welcome all at home. So today I will tell you how adaptive management was applied in practice at the dredging project in Adelaide. So why would we actually use adaptive management in our environmental management of dredging projects? So traditionally, the environmental management approach was more reactive, kind of conservative, because we didn't know that much, so limits were set often too conservative, very strict. The frameworks were set statically, so no changes allowed during the works, and it was very difficult to segregate between natural occurring events and external events. Now we see nowadays that complex projects are becoming more and more complex, a lot of parties involved, and as Alice mentioned before, uncertainties remain. So this requires or needs for a management approach that is adaptive. So about the Adelaide projects. Adelaide's located in South Australia, and Flinders Ports is the main maritime gateway for South Australia. Well, due to the emergence of the post-Panamax vessels, there was a need to widen the channel from about 130 to 170 meters, And with this, their dredging was involved of about 1.5 million cubic meters. This was all executed last year within a period of 3 months. And at this project, we had to deal with a sensitive environment with large seagrass meadows located next to the channel. And in addition to this, there was in the memory of everyone located in Adelaide and South Australia, the memory of the previous dredging projects, which didn't go as well, or at least people thought there was quite an impact to the environment. But at that time, there was not that much monitoring about during the project, so we could not assess the impacts. So this time we wanted to do it differently. And to do it differently, a large monitoring program was set up in consultation with the client, the authorities, different stakeholders involved. And we were monitoring in real life close to the channel and a bit further away to assess the background levels. The boundaries where we had to deal with were based on an 8-month baseline data set where turbidity was measured, and there was a traffic light systems where if we would reach kind of the orange level, we had to adjust our working method to reduce turbidity, and once we would reach the hold levels, we really had to stop to improve the water quality. During this process of kind of negotiating those limits, it was found that during the baseline data set, the water quality and based on the plume modeling, there would not be any exceedance of the limits. And therefore, during the project, we were not allowed to look at the background concentrations. Furthermore, what was important is that dredging works had to be executed in summer periods. So what did we do to gain this system understanding? Prior to the dredging, seagrass mapping occurred. We did our baseline turbidity monitoring data set. We did our plume modeling to assess what would be the impacts to the seagrass meadows. And then during the dredging, we had our real-time turbidity monitoring stations, which provided us data in real time. In addition, we did some handheld monitoring to really see what were the levels close to the dredging. And we had satellite images to give us a better understanding of the spatial distribution of the dredge plumes. We used drones, and furthermore, we used weather information and tidal information to get a better understanding of the natural system and also how the natural system reacted to the dredging works. After the works, again, seagrass meadows were surveyed to assess the impact, and we continued with the turbidity monitoring. However, during the works, different than predicted, we saw quite a rise in turbidity levels, both at the background stations and the stations close to our channel. This all occurred during periods of storm or just after storms. And unlike in the baseline periods, we did see exceedances of the alarm and finally also the hold levels. So how did we deal with this? Well, actually, adaptive management was the perfect tool to do this. So during the works, when we exceeded those alarm levels, we adjusted our work method, we played with the tide, worked with our dredger at different locations. And we also engaged with the authorities and with the client in this process to help understand with all of us how those actions, how effective those actions were. In the end, as I said, we did reach sometimes the hold levels. And for this, we also consulted with a seagrass expert, Paul Erftemeyer, to understand if those impacts, if the continuation of the dredging if that would have an adverse impact to the seagrass meadows, especially during those stormy periods. So his conclusion was actually, as written here in the presentation, that dredging during those periods where there is already very less light will not affect that much how much light will reach the seagrass, because there is already not so much light available. Rather, postponing the dredging until water clarity clears up will increase the duration of low light conditions and will have an adverse impact to the seagrasses. Furthermore, postponement would result that dredging operations would prolong into the summer season, which would have a really adverse impact. So actually the conclusion was that it was better to dredge during those periods of storm conditions to have a better result both for the dredging and for the seagrasses. And with this knowledge, we were allowed to resume the dredging works and complete before the onset of summer. So what did we learn from this? We learned from this that adaptive management really requires a thorough system analysis upfront, but also during the works, and also to be able to adjust your work methods and your framework during the works. We need everyone involved in the system, so both the contractor, the authorities, the communities, and the clients, to all gain a mutual understanding of the system and to optimize the management system. So very important was during this project to learn from each other and to share this message with each other. What's also important to note is that the community was very much involved up front. This was lessons learned from the previous project, and during our project we did not receive any complaints. Furthermore, we need everyone involved in this to make adaptive management and the project a success. What is a nice note to add this presentation is that both seagrass measurements conducted this year after the dredging works have shown us that there has been no adverse impact to the seagrasses, and actually the seagrasses have grown a lot along the channel. So a nice result for this project.
Thank you very much, Irena. It is nice to hear that you could include adaptive monitoring in the project and also see that your dredging works didn't have a bigger impact than you expected up front. Do you think this kind of adaptive monitoring can also be implemented in other projects? Can that be helpful in other projects as well?
Yeah, I think definitely it can be applied at other projects, because you always have some sort of uncertainty what will remain. So you need to monitor upfront, you need to monitor during the works, and you need to be able to learn from it and to adapt to the situation, because you will not know everything upfront. So it's really important that the framework is there to be able to adjust.
Thank you very much, and please stay, because now we would like to open the discussion with the three speakers that we had before. So let's check if we have a connection with Petra.
Yes, hello, I'm still there.
Welcome back.
We can hear you, Petra. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you for all three speakers for your presentations, and thank you for joining the discussion. I think Irena already mentioned monitoring and how important monitoring can be. So I noticed that there's a question from the audience for Petra, so I'm addressing that to Petra, is that building with nature projects often are under monitored. And they're wondering what is your opinion about the costs of this issue and whether it's cost related.
Okay, so is it? I mean, it's probably about that nature-based solution type of projects are often under-monitored, I guess.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's always the case, but yes, I think that is that often happens because monitoring is often used for the last post in the budget, so it's used for budget closure. First, you need to there's a lot of work you need to create and build your project. Oh yeah, and then there's also the monitoring. And a lot of people do forget it. You have to really have it ready up front in your budget, because if you have to implement it later and look for money, it's really difficult to get it organized. Yeah, it's not only for nature-based kind of projects, it's actually for all kind of projects where you're working in a natural system, that monitoring is key. Because you need to know what's going on, and you need to know if you need to adapt to because of different circumstances. So I would say we actually need much bigger budgets for monitoring everywhere. Also, furthermore, to understand the system much better in the future.
How important do you think monitoring is for upscaling dealing with nature?
I think it's key, because if we do not monitor our projects in a good way, I mean, if we only know a little bit about the project and how it will evolve, but we are not sure enough about the effects if we scale up, then it will be very difficult to scale up. I mean, we can scale up, but it will be very difficult to get legislators or authorities, well, let them agree with such a project if you cannot take away the risks that they see.
Thank you. Linda, do you have a question?
Yeah, I saw a question coming in for Ellis, and I also think it's very interesting. We talked a lot about practicalities. And the question is, what would you answer an engineer when he or she says that we cannot calculate the safety a nature-based solution can give? So in more classical gray applications, you have a certain level that you can calculate. So, but in nature-based solutions, we heard it's important to adapt them and to change them if needed. So what would you answer an engineer on that question?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because the question itself shows you one of the types of uncertainties. It's the ambiguity that you can actually calculate a gray solution better than a nature-based solution. And if that is your perceived world, then yes, that's what you're going to say. But if actually you look at the examples that have been presented here, we do calculate wave reduction in mangrove forests. We do calculate the impact of sandy foreshores on safety levels of the hinterland. So, and we do know how to calculate the sand transports of the sand engine, for example. Of course, we are monitoring that to learn even more and to confirm what we know. And we're doing the experiments in the delta flume to see how they behave under extreme conditions. So it is not necessarily the case that we cannot calculate the nature-based solutions, but it is talking about the fact that we are working on further improvements in this field, but at the same time also, if you're calculating the safety of a dike for a goal in 20 years, but you do not know the uncertainty of sea level rise, how are you going to respond if in 20 years that deep uncertainty, the very unknown in future, has suddenly created a lock-in situation where it's very difficult to change your dike, whereas if you would have taken a nature-based solution, it was adaptive and flexible, you would have come much further. So it's an interesting one, because it basically gathers a lot of different types of uncertainties into one single question. And when you start to unravel all of this, it is the ambiguity, it is your unknown or partially unknown system understanding, but it is also your unknown future.
and it's the known future that is the real challenge. So that is where we argue, well, this question is not a single question anymore.
So actually it's more about change of mindset a bit.
I think that ambiguity in itself is a highly underestimated aspect in the dialogue of what is the type of solution that I'm going to choose. And that is regardless of the type of solution. So whether it is gray or whether it is green, if you have a certain perceived reality, you have a preference for a given solution. And just addressing only that, there is literature on that as well. I think it's very important that we are more aware of that dialogue and that we talk about it.
Irena, is this a dialogue that you also find missing maybe in practice sometimes?
Yeah, I think so. I think we all go for the solutions we know or feel most comfortable with. But yeah, especially talking with all different stakeholders involved and all different parties, then you come to new solutions which you may maybe not think of before. But yeah, it's certainly not why you would not continue with a project, because you don't know.
Yeah, and what you achieved in Adelaide is quite novel. You think that the message should be spread more?
Yeah, I think the message should be spread more, and I think especially what we learned there, which was also new for us, that dredging during those periods of storm and of low light was actually the period where we had to really go for it, and that was of both the benefit of the seagrass and for the dredging work. So that's a message that was new for us, and I think should be spread more. And actually, Paul Erftmeijer told this message as well today at the PIA conference in Perth.
Okay.
So the message is being spread.
That's good news.
Yeah, that's very good. I think I saw another question for Ellis. I lost it. There are so many questions coming in at the moment that it's quite hard to keep track.
I think I spotted an interesting one for Petra as well.
Ah, so go on.
Which refers to the contract issue, and it's an interesting challenge. And the question here is, you mentioned that real projects, this is quote unquote, requires success and rigid contracts, while also noting that adaptivity is required. So what would you recommend the clients to how to redefine success?
Of course, that really differs per project, but I always try to communicate with my client and explain how things are working, how a system works, what the risks are, what the benefits are, how we can change these risks. So I think it's often you just have to have this conversation with your clients, and I think many more people need to do that as well, in order to change these things, because they will not change overnight, and it's still a lot of work we need to do here. But it starts with this discussion and showing the options there are, and showing some good examples as well, where things have gone in that way, and that's it. It was a success. Projects that were a success, although we changed things and we didn't have a rigid contract. So I think that's it's a message for everybody. Have this conversation with your clients as well.
So the message is not defining the project success, but starting the dialogue before you do.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Linda, do you still have your question?
Yes, I found it again. It is directed to Ellis, and Ellis, you as a researcher, Do you think that science can help further to implement building with nature solutions?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yes, it is of course how you define science as well, right? And we are doing all the nice Ecoshape pilots in the field, and there's a lot of science actually that's associated with that, and that does show that, like, by demonstrating it in pilots how it works is already a big step forward in just the general acceptance of the audience in that, oh, actually it's really nice, what's happening here in the field, and I can see it. But of course you still need additional science, like I mentioned before, this delta flume experiment on extreme events, to really show if you're choosing such a solution also to function under extreme conditions, how good do they perform. And that's where you need additional, like, more experiments in a more controlled way as well, for situations that you cannot monitor in the field, or you hope not to be able to monitor in the field because of extreme condition, you don't want to be there, right? So but it's also the dialogue with the practitioners on what is the type of knowledge that you need. Where is it that you still feel that you lack certain parts of information that needs to be provided for you to be sure that you are going to do the right method. And that's where you have to, you have to go back to your monitor, for example, the one about how do you best dredge, right? What is the information that you need? So that's part of it as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question, right?
Yeah.
And Irena, I think there's quite a practical question here for you. So considering dredging and the environment, what would be the best period to do it, with high turbidity or low turbidity?
So yeah, that of course depends on each area and each specific environment. So it cannot be applied everywhere generic in the world, but at this specific area here in Adelaide, it was actually best that we learned to dredge during those periods of low light, so during those storm periods, and also the restrictions which were already imposed at us is to dredge during the winter period and not during the summer periods where the seagrass really flourish and grow.
Yeah. And is that a dialogue? I mean, the information that you base that on, is that a dialogue between you and local stakeholders?
Yeah, at this stage of where we, the period where we were allowed to dredge, that was a bit earlier there than we were involved as a contractor, but that was together with the authorities and the clients and the community. But what's nice to mention is indeed that we needed science and available science that's there about seagrass and how much light they can tolerate, and then asking the question to the expert and to use that into practice applied on the dredging project. So maybe not the first project where you would maybe use this research initially for, but it was very valuable information to have to be able to use that and apply this adaptive management.
Yeah, that's clear. Yeah, thank you very much. Anything else? Or,
I think actually it's might be time to wrap up.
It's about time to wrap up.
Unfortunately.
All right. Well, in that case, I would like to thank you ladies, Petra, Ellis, Irena, but also the other speakers of today, Tom and Arjen and Jure, who have done a wonderful job. You will all receive a copy of our very precious nature or Building with Nature book that's coming up. And for the audience, if you still have questions, of course, you can reach out to these people, maybe not today, but you know where to find them. And if not, you can look at the website at ecoshape.org. I think we had a very nice day. We started off talking about two enablers about technology, and Arjen gave a very nice overview of all the tools that we still have available at the moment, but also what might be there in the future. And Tom gave us a very nice idea about how to apply knowledge, but also how to incorporate your local setting and your stakeholders into making that concept into a feasible design and a practical solution. We then continued into the enabler of adaptive monitoring, maintenance, and management. I think it's very clear that Ellis showed us how important it is to consider uncertainties. And looking at the reactions from the audience, I also think that it's very important that people become aware of this and see in practical examples how to cope with it. And I think Irena and Petra gave us some very nice examples of how to do that. So thank you very much. I would also like to thank Jurre at the start of the talk for giving a nice overview of the website. So if you're inspired, please have a look at the website ecoshape.org to find more about landscapes, about concepts, about research, about maybe some other stuff as well. With that, I think I would like to conclude this part of the session. I think there's still a lot of things to discover in terms of research, in terms of stakeholder engagement, and maybe also in terms of budget spending on monitoring and what else. So I think that's a nice bridge to what is still to come in our webinar series. Belinda, would you like to explain?
Yes. Yeah, I would also like to mention on the website in a couple of days you will be able to find the recording of today's webinar. And also we have already the recording from the last webinar. And that are, yeah, if you want to see something again, if you think something is interesting, please watch it again. And as Simeon mentioned, you can always send an email to us, to Ecoshape, or one of the presenters if you have more questions. And we will give an answer to all the questions that came in via the chat that we couldn't talk about today. So if your question was not answered, then you will receive an answer via email. And yeah, now I would also like to thank the speakers again, because I really had fun organizing the webinar and having the talk today. And this wouldn't have been possible with all the partners that Ecoshape has. So thank you very much for the partners. And as Simeon mentioned, we have one more webinar to come up that will be the last of the webinars of this series, and we will discuss the enablers of the business case and multi-stakeholders approach. And this webinar will take place on 14th of January with 2 new hosts. So I would like to thank also Simeon, who was a pleasure to host this webinar with you. And
thank you, Belinda.
Thank you. And also thank you for you at home to watch this webinar. So I would like to end with this. Thank you very much and hope to see you in January.